The knock on my door wasn't a knock, it was an invasion. And behind it stood the son I had raised, holding papers that would tear apart everything I had ever called mine. I had lived in the country house for over 40 years. My late husband built it with his bare hands, nail by nail, brick by brick. We raised our son there, Mark. I cooked every family meal in that warm kitchen with the window that opened to a field of wildflowers. My husband passed on a cold morning in that very house, his hand clutching mine as the fire crackled in the hearth. And now, here was Mark, me only child, asking me to leave. No, not asking, telling. He placed the documents on the coffee table, neat and legal, the ink still fresh like a wound. Mom, he said, avoiding my eyes. It's time. You'll be more comfortable in a retirement apartment. It's got assisted services. You won't have to do anything. No cooking, no cleaning, no soul, either, I thought. And besides, he added, Julia and I have plans for this place. We're starting our family. The city's too noisy, too small. This is perfect. I stared at him. My son. The same boy I stayed up nursing through fevers. The boy I carried through divorce court when his father walked away. But it wasn't Mark standing there anymore. It was someone else, someone polished, impatient, with eyes that no longer saw me, only my house. You want this house? I said slowly. Not me. Not my company. Just this property. He flinched. That's not fair. I picked up the paper. It was fair to the world, legally sound. Years ago, I had signed over the house in my will to Mark. I hadn't expected to still be alive when he decided to claim it. I'm not dead, I whispered. Mom, please, don't make this harder. Harder? I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him remember. But I didn't. I just looked at the photo of my husband still hanging over the mantel. He wouldn't have believed this. He wouldn't have let this happen. Give me a week, I said. I'll pack. He nodded and left without another word. The movers came on Friday. Julia didn't come. She was always too busy for things like this emotionally messy stuff, she called it. But her presence was everywhere. The throw pillows she sent ahead, the Pinterest boards she showed Mark. Farmhouse chic, she had called it. I stood by as boxes swallowed my life, each one marked with stickers, cold and impersonal. An assistant from the retirement complex waited outside in a van, all smiles and chipper conversation. I didn't listen. I looked at the house one last time, the wooden beams, the worn carpet, the scuffed kitchen counters where I taught Mark to bake cornbread. Then I walked out with only 2 bags and a silent goodbye. The apartment was small, clean, sterile. They tried hard to make it feel like home, but it never would be. There was no smell of pine in the air, no creak in the floorboards when the wind howled. The meals were delivered. The television was large. The neighbors were quiet, as if preparing for death. I didn't cry, not once. But every night, I imagined Julia moving through my house in her designer slippers, complaining about the rustic fireplace or the cold bathroom tiles. I imagined Mark pretending he belonged there, pretending he understood the silence of the woods, the rhythm of the birds in the early morning. I waited for the winter to arrive. And when it did, it came brutally. The country house wasn't built for modern luxury. My husband had sealed its bones with love, not insulation. There was a trick to keeping warm: how to stoke the fire before dusk, how to wrap the pipes, how to seal the draft near the back door that no one ever noticed until the frost came. Julia noticed it too late. The first call came from Mark's cell. I didn't answer. The second came from Julia. Her voice was high-pitched, frantic, the way it got when the internet went out or when the heater in their downtown condo had once malfunctioned. Hi. This is Julia. She began awkwardly, like we weren't family. We were wondering. There's no central heating? The fireplace doesn't catch. The house is freezing. There's some kind of draft. Do you know a handyman? I listened. Every syllable was a thread unraveling the neat world she had tried to build. I waited until she stopped talking. Then I said, I suppose you should have asked me before taking it. There was silence. Then the line cut. 2 days later, it made the news. Not big news, but the local kind, the kind that still cared about old houses and icy winters. A young couple had to be rescued after carbon monoxide started leaking from a makeshift heat source in an old country home. Julia had tried to use a kerosene heater near the kitchen, blocked the airflow without realizing it. Mark had gotten dizzy. She'd panicked and called emergency services. They survived, but barely. They moved out the next week. I never said, I told you so. That wasn't my way. But a letter arrived in my mailbox a week later. It was from Mark. 3 pages, handwritten. Mom. It began, I didn't realize. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought Julia and I could build a life in that house. But it isn't a house. It's a person. It's you. And without you in it, it's just wood and wind and silence. I didn't reply. Not then. But I took the bus up the hill that weekend. I hadn't been back since I left. The house stood there lonely, shivering under the weight of snow. The porch creaked when I stepped on it. The front door opened slowly. And the smell. Oh, it was still there. Faint, but mine. I lit the fireplace properly. It caught on the first try. By midnight, the house was warm again. And I stayed. The next morning, I brewed coffee in the old tin pot, the one with a chip on the handle that Mark used to complain about. The fire had burned through the night, just like I taught it, slow, steady, never too hot. As I sat by the window and watched the sun melt a thin layer of frost from the porch railing, I felt something in my chest shift. It wasn't quite peace. Not yet. But it was the start of something real. A knock came at noon. I knew the rhythm before I even stood up. 3 short, then a pause. He used to knock like that when he was a boy, afraid of waking his father during his hangovers. Old habits die hard. I opened the door. Mark stood there with snow on his shoulders and guilt written across every inch of his face. He looked thinner, or maybe just smaller. Behind him, Julia sat in their car, not making eye contact, her manicured fingers tapping her phone screen. Mom, he said, his voice tight. Can I come in? I stepped aside. If you remember how to open that door. He smiled, just a little. Not the smug one I'd come to hate over the years, but the one from when he was 5 and wanted to show me a frog he caught in the creek. He walked in slowly, eyes scanning everything like it was both familiar and foreign. The photos on the wall, the worn chair by the fire, the mug I always use for cocoa. I forgot the smell, he whispered. I said nothing. Let the house speak for itself. He sat down, rubbed his hands together, then looked at me. I was wrong. I nodded. I didn't need to hear the details. Sometimes admitting the sin was enough. She said it'd be easier if we just started over out here. Said we could give the baby space to grow. He looked down. We lost it, Mom. I blinked. What? The baby. We were pregnant. Didn't tell you. Lost it last week. It hit me harder than I expected. Not because of Julia, but because I could see, in that moment, the boy I had raised cracking open again. I'm sorry, I said quietly. He sniffed, wiped his nose with the back of his hand. I thought building something new meant erasing everything old. I thought I had to take this place from you to make a life of my own. And now, I realize nothing good ever comes from stealing love. You have to be given it. Earn it. He stood, stepped toward me. I don't want the house anymore, he said. It's not mine. It never was. I looked at him for a long time. Sit, I finally said. Eat something. You look like you haven't had a real meal in days. He smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. Over the next few weeks, the snow deepened. I stayed in the house, refusing the apartment completely. Mark came by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with firewood. Julia came once, brought me some soup in a plastic container. We didn't talk much, but her eyes were softer than before. Less sharp, less sure. I wasn't cruel, but I didn't open up easily either. One night, Mark arrived with a strange look on his face. I want to move back, he said. Not into the house. Not like that. But close. Maybe rent a little place in town. Be nearby. I nodded. I've been offered a teaching job at the high school. English lit. I blinked. You hate literature. He chuckled. Turns out I don't. I just hated reading under pressure. When I picked up Steinbeck last week, something changed. I thought about Dad. My heart stirred. He loved Grapes of Wrath. I know. I remember. We sat in silence. The house felt fuller than it had in years. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it came in waves. The fields behind the house lit up with goldenrod and daffodils. The creek thawed. Birds came back, and so did something else, life. Mark moved into a small cottage down the hill. Julia visited on weekends. They were rebuilding, slowly. Not the same marriage. Not the same people. But something gentler, more honest. Sometimes, they'd help me with repairs, fix the porch steps, repaint the fence, clear the garden beds. Other times, they just sat on the porch with me, drinking tea and watching the sun go down. We didn't talk about the past much. Some wounds don't need salt. They need space. One evening, he turned to me and said, You know, Mom, Maybe this house was always meant to be a shelter, not just for you, but for all of us when we lose our way. I thought about that. Then I looked at the wooden beams above us, the nails my husband drove in with steady hands, the floorboards worn from our feet, the scars and the polish, the stories buried in every corner. Yes, I said, but only if we treat it like home. That summer, I hosted my first family dinner in years. It wasn't big, just me, Mark, and Julia, but it felt right. We sat at the old table, laughed too hard at dumb jokes, and remembered who we used to be before life turned sharp. After dessert, Mark stood up and walked into the living room. He picked something up off the mantel and brought it back to me. It was the deed to the house. I had it reversed, he said. Back in your name. Permanently. I stared at it. My hands trembled. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He put it in my lap. This place belongs to its keeper, not to people passing through. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say so much. But all I could do was reach for his hand and hold it. He didn't pull away. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like a mother again. Fall crept in like a quiet apology. The leaves changed their clothes, dropping golden regrets onto the porch. I found myself waking up earlier, just to sit by the window and watch the fog rise from the hills. There was something different in the air, that yearsome mix of softness and truth. It wasn't just the season changing. It was us. Mark came by every Saturday like clockwork. He brought groceries without asking if I needed them. He checked the gutters, cleaned the chimney, helped me lift heavy things even though I'd told him not to treat me like glass. But it was his quietness that struck me most. The boy who used to fill every room with noise now listened. He let the house breathe. Let me breathe. One morning, he showed up with something tucked under his arm. I found this in a box, he said. Dad's journal. I froze. I hadn't seen it in decades. I didn't even know Mark knew it existed. I thought he burned that. Mark shook his head. He hid it. Maybe he didn't want it gone. Just forgotten for a while. He handed it to me like it was sacred. I opened the cover. The smell of old ink and tobacco rose up like memory. My husband's handwriting was messy, impatient, but familiar. There were entries from the first year we bought the house, little notes about hammer sizes and insulation failures. Then it got deeper. Lines about Mark's first birthday. A page about how proud he felt the day I planted the lilacs. Even a section where he wrote to me, letters he never mailed but left in this secret place. One line caught in my throat. If this house outlives me, I hope it holds her the way I never could. I pressed the book to my chest. Thank you, I whispered. Mark didn't say anything. He just sat beside me, his silence the loudest kind of apology. Winter returned, but this time, it didn't bring tragedy. I was ready. The firewood was stocked, the windows sealed. Mark even installed a backup generator behind the barn. Julia sent up a new quilt she sewed herself, full of clumsy stitches and little embroidered initials. The house felt full again, not with people, but with meaning. On Christmas Eve, they both came up with a surprise. I didn't expect gifts. I didn't want them. But Julia insisted. Inside the wrap box was a framed photo. It was us, me, Mark, and Julia standing on the porch, smiling like it was always this way. Below the picture, a quote was engraved in wood. A home is not made of walls. It's made of coming back. I touched the frame. My voice caught. Mark cleared his throat. We wanted to ask, would you bless our idea? What idea? We want to start a foundation. Small, local. Help seniors who get displaced. Retired people who lose their homes. We'll name it after Dad. And the house. We'd love to use it on weekends for healing retreats. Only with your permission. I blinked at him. This is your home. He smiled. No, Mom. It's ours if you want it to be. Tears came faster than I could stop them. Not because of the offer, but because after everything, after betrayal, pain, loss, they had finally understood what this house truly was. A sanctuary. Not something you take. Something you earn your way back into. In the spring, we welcomed the first guests. 3 women, all over 70. Each had a different story. One was evicted by her daughter, another abandoned after her husband's death, the third cheated out of her pension. They arrived quiet, guarded, arms folded across their chests. I served tea. Let them sit on the porch. Let the wind speak to them the way it had spoken to me for decades. By the second night, one of them wept by the fire. She hadn't cried since her son left her at a motel 6 months ago. The next morning, she cooked breakfast for all of us, pancakes with too much cinnamon, just the way my husband used to like them. The house accepted them. I saw it in the way the floorboards stopped creaking under their steps, in the way the wind didn't howl as hard, in the way the fire burned brighter when they left. They left little notes in the guest journal. I forgot I was a person. You reminded me. I found home in a stranger's rocking chair. If my son ever comes looking for me, tell him I'm finally safe. Mark cried when he read them. Julia donated half her bonus to fund another retreat. By year's end, we'd welcomed 18 guests. Some stayed for days, some weeks. A few never wanted to leave but understood when it was time. And every time they went, they left behind something small. A scarf, a book, a garden tool, a piece of their story tucked into the walls of this old country home. It made the house feel more alive than it ever had. Not just mine, not just my husband's, but a home with a heartbeat. One evening, Mark came up just before dusk. He sat beside me on the porch, handed me a worn envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "It's from Dad. I found it tucked behind a cabinet. It was sealed. I didn't open it." My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, written in my husband's shaky handwriting during the last month of his life. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're still here and I'm glad. You always were stronger than me. I didn't build this house for us. I built it for you. Because even back then, I knew one day I'd be gone. And I wanted you to have something that listened, even when no one else did. I hope the walls hold you gently. I hope the light in the window still guides someone home. And I hope, one day, Mark finds his way back not just to the house, but to you." I closed my eyes. The wind blew, soft and warm. Mark didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. He was already home. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace, letter in hand, reading the words over and over as the flames danced in front of me. My husband's voice echoed in every syllable, like he was sitting right there, nodding at me from his old armchair. And for the first time in years, I let myself miss him open line of shame, no holding back. The grief wasn't a storm anymore. It was a stream, quiet and steady, running through me. I ran my fingers along the wooden floor, feeling its grooves like the lines on his hands. I had once hated the scratches on this floor, the marks from Mark's toys, the scuffs from dragging chairs, the tiny dent where Julia dropped a wine glass and never cleaned it up properly. But now, those scars told a story. Not one of damage, but of life. In the morning, I walked the house slowly. I touched the beams above the kitchen table where we used to hang garlic. I opened the back door and stood where the garden used to be, now overrun, but still full of buried seeds. A thought stirred in my chest, firm and clear. It was time to restore the house, not remodel it, not modernize it. Restore it. Let it age with dignity. Let it breathe again with purpose. That very afternoon, I called Mark. "Bring your tools," I told him, "and wear clothes you don't mind getting dirty." He laughed. "Are you putting me to work? I'm inviting you to build something. Not for you. Not for me. For them." He knew what I meant. The restoration started in the attic. Old boxes, forgotten toys, yellowed curtains, memories tucked away, heavy with dust. Mark climbed up with me, and together we sorted through them, laughing at the ridiculous things we once thought precious. A broken sled, a Monopoly board missing half its money, a photo of Mark in cowboy boots and a tutu. Julia nearly cried laughing when she saw that one. We cleared space, polished floorboards, patched the roof. We turned the attic into a reading loft for future guests, a quiet, sacred place where grief could rest without being chased away. Downstairs, Julia offered to repaint the guest rooms. "I don't want them too perfect," I told her. "They should still feel like a home, not a hotel." She nodded. Soft colors, warm light. Nothing sterile. I watched her as she worked. She had changed more than I expected. I saw less vanity, more patience. Less control, more humility. She was still sharp around the edges, but there was tenderness in the way she folded linens, in the way she knelt to scrub a floor corner no one would ever see. And one evening, after a long day of sanding old window frames, she stayed behind and said quietly, "I never knew what a real home felt like. Not until this place." I looked at her, truly looked. "You're learning," I said. She smiled. As spring deepened, word spread about what we were doing. A local news crew asked to film a segment. I declined. This house wasn't a story for the evening broadcast. It was a sanctuary, and sanctuaries weren't meant to be spectacles. Still, People came quietly, gently. A man named Walter, 79, who'd lost his wife and was sleeping in his truck because his son needed the space. A woman named Ellen, 81, whose landlord raised her rent by 80% and told her to find somewhere more suitable for her age. A veteran named Hank, blind in one eye, who brought nothing but a backpack and a letter from a daughter he hadn't heard from in 8 years. They each stayed for weeks. We didn't ask them to share, but slowly they did. They planted herbs in the garden, painted birdhouses, built a small bench under the cedar tree where I used to cry after my husband passed. They became more than guests. They became roots. One warm May morning, I walked into the kitchen and found Mark already there, sipping coffee and staring out the window. He looked up. "You know what today is?" I shook my head. "Exactly 1 year since I took the house." I went still. He stood, came over to the sink, and set his mug down beside mine. "I think about it every day," he said. "What I did, what it meant, what I almost destroyed." "You didn't destroy it," I said softly. "You gave it a reason to live again." He shook his head. "You did that. I just followed your lead." There was silence. Then he said, "I'm proud of you." It caught me off guard. "Me? Yeah. You didn't shut down. You didn't lock the door and let the pain rot in here. You turned it outward. You gave the house back its soul." I looked out the window. The garden was in bloom. The porch was swept. The old oak tree stood tall, cradling its new swing installed by Walter just last week. I thought about my husband's letter, about Mark as a boy, curled up on the couch with fever, about the women who came here to forget and ended up remembering who they were. I didn't give it a soul, I whispered. It always had one. I just stopped being afraid of sharing it. Mark reached out and squeezed my shoulder. And in that moment, I knew my family hadn't vanished. It had expanded. One afternoon in June, Julia called me outside. "Someone's here to see you." I stepped out onto the porch and saw a woman maybe in her late 50s standing with a suitcase in hand. Her eyes were tired, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands shook slightly as she offered me a hesitant smile. "I hope this isn't too forward," she said. "But I heard you welcome people like me." "People like you?" She hesitated. "People who've lost everything but still want to believe in kindness." I nodded. "What's your name, dear?" "Linda." "Well, Linda," I said, opening the door behind me. "Come on in. The kettle's hot. The chairs are soft. And there's room by the fire for your story whenever you're ready to tell it." She cried. Not loudly. Just a single tear, sliding down her cheek as she stepped across the threshold. And the house exhaled soft, warm, forgiving. Home. Always. Summer arrived with a kindness I hadn't felt in years. The porch stayed warm into the evenings. The fireflies stitched little patterns in the dark, and laughter echoed from the kitchen long after sunset. But it wasn't just the season that had softened. It was me. And them. Linda settled in quietly. She was gentle and thoughtful, always asking before touching anything, always quick to say thank you even for the smallest things. Her story, when it finally came, was heartbreakingly familiar. A daughter too busy, a new husband who wasn't comfortable with an older woman in the house, and a lease that never got renewed. "I didn't ask for much," she told me one evening, her voice low as we shelled peas on the porch. "Just to stay in the spare room. Just to be somewhere I wasn't invisible." I nodded. "You're not invisible here." "I didn't think places like this existed," she whispered. I reached over and touched her hand. "They didn't. We had to build one." As word continued to spread quietly, gently, through phone calls and hushed conversations at Senior Center, we started getting more letters. Not applications, just letters. Stories. One woman wrote about being evicted by her own sister. Another described losing her house after a medical bankruptcy. A man in his 80s said his landlord put him out when his wife died, and the rent checks stopped coming on time. We didn't have room for everyone. Not yet. But we responded to every letter. Personally. Kindly. We mailed handmade cards. Sent small gift boxes with tea and notes. Julia even started knitting scarves for each person whose story we couldn't hold in person yet. "We might not have space," she said, "but we can still offer warmth." That became our motto. Offer warmth. Mark came to me one day in August with an idea. "We have that old shed out back." "Yes. What if we renovated it into a small guest suite? Nothing fancy, just safe, comfortable." Maybe even one more bed means one less night in a car for someone. I smiled. You've become a real country boy. He grinned. I've become your son again. So we did it. Together. We cleared out the cobwebs, replaced the rotted floorboards, installed a little window, painted the walls a pale sunflower yellow. Julia added curtains with lace trim. I placed a tiny rocking chair in the corner and a bookshelf full of dog-eared classics. When it was done, we named it the Sparrow Room. Because sparrows, like people, sometimes get pushed from their nests. But they always find their way back to the sky. One day in late September, Mark surprised me with a visitor. "Mom," he said, leading a man up the front steps. "This is Aaron. He's the property lawyer who helped me change the deed last year. He has something you should see." I raised a brow. "More paperwork." Aaron chuckled. "Not quite." He handed me a sealed envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside was a new deed. But this time, it wasn't just for the house. It was for the Kind Hearth Foundation, a registered nonprofit. In my name. The house, the land, the Sparrow Room, all protected, all tax-exempt, all legally shielded from any future threat. My hands shook. "You made it real," I said. Mark nodded. "We made it safe. You don't ever have to worry again. This house will always be what it is, for as long as it stands." I looked out at the porch, at the chairs, at the window boxes, at the people who now called this place a waypoint between brokenness and healing. And I cried, not from sadness, but from the rarest feeling of all, relief. That winter, we had more guests than ever before. A man who walked 6 miles to get here. A woman who was sleeping in a laundromat before she found our phone number written in the back of a library book. And one afternoon, just after the first snowfall, I opened the door and found a girl standing there. Maybe no older than 20, holding a toddler. "I know it's not for people like me," she said quickly, but I didn't know where else to go. Her name was Amber. Her son was Benji. She had been taking care of her grandmother for 2 years until a distant uncle sold the house, without warning. Now they were sleeping in a car. I looked down at Benji. He was chewing on a mitten. "This house is for anyone," I said, "who knows what it means to lose one." They stayed through Christmas. Amber helped in the kitchen. Benji took his first steps in the hallway, between 2 rocking chairs. We all cheered like the world had tilted. He laughed and fell straight into my arms. And I held him like a second chance. New Year's Eve was quiet. We didn't throw a party. We just gathered on the porch. Mark, Julia, Linda, Amber, Benji, a few of our guests, and me. We sipped cider. We passed around a notebook where everyone could write one thing they were leaving behind in the old year, and one thing they hoped to carry forward. When the notebook came to me, I paused. What was I leaving behind? The answer came instantly. Anger. And what did I want to carry? Grace. I closed the book, hugged it to my chest, and whispered to the house, "Thank you." As the wind shifted, I could have sworn the floorboards hummed back. In spring, Julia found out she was pregnant again. We didn't say anything at first, superstition, maybe, but as the weeks passed, she began to glow in a way I hadn't seen before. Not just hope, but readiness. "I'm scared," she admitted to me one day, folding laundry in the Sparrow Room. "Of doing it wrong. Of becoming my mother." I took her hands. "You'll do it right, because you know what wrong looks like. That's the difference." She exhaled, tears in her eyes. "I want our child to grow up knowing kindness." "They will," I said, "because it lives in their home." She smiled. "This house isn't even theirs, and still, I feel like it's in their blood." "It is," I said. "It's in all of ours now." On a bright July morning, Julia gave birth to a daughter. They named her Hope. And when they brought her to the country house for the first time, I held her by the hearth and said, "Welcome home, little one." She cooed and reached for the light coming through the window. The same light that had warmed me for a lifetime. The same light I had nearly lost, then found again. In forgiveness. In rebuilding. In legacy. Some people build empires. Some chase legacies in books, statues, or money. But me? I built a kitchen that never turned anyone away. A porch that remembered the sound of everyone's footsteps. A fire that stayed lit even when hearts went cold. This wasn't just a house. It was our redemption. One board, one breath, one story at a time. And when I'm gone, I hope they never replace the creaky floors. Let them creak. Let them sing. Let them tell every soul who steps inside, you were never alone. You were just on your way home.